Hello there! This is my attempt at the book cover tag. This tag was created by Lisa in Bookland. I'll link her original video down below. Now, I was not actually tagged myself, but this tag looked interesting to me, and book covers are something that I have never really thought as much about as maybe I should have, and for some reason the tag got me looking at my own books and thinking like how nice some of the covers were, so it's a nice chance to talk about them. And just to make a more bookish video, which is something that I'm probably going to be devoting more time to anyway. So without further ado, let's get to the covers. So the first prompt has 3 sub-prompts to it, I guess you could say, and the prompt itself is book covers that are paintings. The first category is for paintings that fit the book perfectly, but weren't commissioned specifically for the book. So I have 2 books in this category. The first one is my edition of War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. This painting is called The Battle of Borodino. I've also seen it called The Battle of Moscow, and it was painted by Louis-François Lejeune? Yes. I'm going to write his name on the screen just if you want to find more of his paintings. I probably can't pronounce it very well, and I apologize to all French speakers who might be watching this. But it depicts a battle, one of the many battles Napoleon was commanding at, and it's a pivotal battle in the story. So this book is one of my prized books. It's a little beat up because it made a journey with me, but I couldn't leave it behind, so it kind of has more character to me. And I've always liked this style of painting. We had a book on Napoleon when I was a child that had many paintings of this style, and I've always seen it as some of the best painting I've ever seen. The second one I would pick in this category is the cover of Gladiator by Philip Wiley. This cover is called The Superman, I believe, and it was painted by a man named Rockwell Kent, which is rather funny because Gladiator was it's actually a very important book. It was published in 1930, and it's basically the first superhero story, I guess you could say, even though the main character never really winds up becoming a superhero as we would think of it. He has the powers we would recognize in Superman, and it was published 8 years before Superman hit stands for the first time. And it's sad that today it's hardly read, and even people that do read it, they only find it because they're trying to track down the roots of superheroes. And this cover is called Superman, and it's this guy, he looks very anguished, even though he has all this power, and it just encapsulates the feeling of the story. I hope I don't get censored for showing this actually on camera, but also the irony that the guy's name that painted it is Kent, and it would go on to inspire Superman, and all of that is very, it's very cosmically perfect. The second category is paintings that I really like but don't fit the book, in my opinion, for some reason. And I only have one in this category because not many of my books actually have paintings on the cover. If Lisa from Lisa in Bookland happens to watch this, I know that she really likes paintings on covers, which is why she had 3 categories for this. But anyway, my edition of Anna Karenina has a lovely painting on it, a portrait, and I believe it is called Portrait of a Woman by Ivan Nikolaevich Kramskoy. So it's a really, really great painting, and I love it aesthetically, but this doesn't fit Anna Karenina how I see her in my head when I'm reading it. There's something kind of arrogant or overly penetrating. It makes the painting incredibly powerful, but I don't think it really fits Anna. Anna to me seemed more sort of, I don't know, that she puts on an exterior of gaiety when she's actually very thoughtful, and I don't think this embodies that character, even though it's great. This one's just kind of an honorable mention. I considered my copy of the Metamorphosis, but it doesn't fit the story, and I don't particularly like it, but it is a painting, so This next category is actually kind of difficult for me because I don't have any books with covers that are paintings that were commissioned specifically for it. which is funny. I have quite a few Wheel of Time books, but they've all got the new covers. They don't have the paintings, and I actually prefer the new covers, even though I think those paintings were legitimately great. So for this option, I'm just going to pick a book that has a painterly kind of style, and I'm pretty sure it is an illustration, although the colors may have been applied digitally. But it's the cover for The Shrinking Man by Richard Matheson. And I mean, it's a tiny dude running away from a spider. It's awesome, and it has a nice aesthetic. I like how the spider is just a little hard to see, but it's highlighted very well. You can really feel the textures. And it has a painterly, illustrated vibe to it, so it's the only thing I could pick for option 3, and I didn't want to skip. And I like this cover. I haven't read this yet. I'm really looking forward to it. I really liked the movie. I forget when the movie came out. I think it was the 60s or something. But they did a really nice job with it, so I'm excited to read this. And I've read one other book by Richard Matheson, I Am Legend, which I'm actually going to make a dedicated video on that, by the way. If I make that promise, I'm more likely to keep it sooner, I hope. Now we come to prompt number 2. This one doesn't have any subcategories. TV tie-in covers, well, TV film tie-in covers. I usually don't like them. So I decided to give 2 options that I didn't care for particularly, and 2 that actually did work for me. So the ones I didn't like, I don't care for the Netflix interpretation of The Witcher, so I'm not a big fan of having this for the cover, even though I really like Henry Cavill. It just reminds me of what the Netflix series is, and how confounding they made this wonderful story. And it just annoys me to have this cover, but I really wanted to read this, and I wasn't being picky about my covers, so this is what I wound up getting at that time. I might replace it later just to have some continuity in my collection, but at the same time, I lent this to someone, so now it has like extra sentimental value that they had it and gave it back, so I guess I'm stuck with it. The other one is kind of the same thing. You'd think I'd learned from my mistake, but I decided to get the first Wheel of Time book. The funny thing is that aesthetically, I like this cover. It's not exactly bad. It's got Moraine here, looking very dramatic in a gateway, but the problem for me is that Moraine is not the main character of the books, but they kind of made her into the main character of the first season of the series, if I understand correctly. And I have not made a legitimate attempt to watch that series, because after The Witcher, I said to myself, I'm not going to spend time watching a series, I'm just going to go right to the book, and if it's worth reading, I'll read it. And then maybe I'll give the show a chance if it seems kind of faithful. And I saw some little bits and I didn't like it, so the cool cover, but I don't care for it as much. Now I've got 2 covers that are TV movie tie-ins that I actually do really like. First is The Martian. Very good book, very good movie by Ridley Scott. And it's funny because I recently did a video talking about The Last Duel and why I didn't like that movie, and which was a bit hard for me because Ridley Scott's made so many great films, and this is one of them. It's a phenomenal adaptation, and I think Matt Damon was great casting for Mark Watney. Even though when I was reading it, I was trying to kind of imagine Mark my own way, but Matt Damon just really nailed it, and I don't mind having his face on this cover because he does fit the character. His acting was really good, and this has the vibe of the story of this one guy facing down Mars that will fear his botany powers, so it's really good cover in and of itself. Another one is The Queen's Gambit by Walter Tevis. I was in a bookstore and just randomly found it here. And I started reading just the first page, and it was obviously going to be great. And I thought it had been based on a true story, so I didn't really pay attention to the series. But then when I saw it, I realized it was a work of fiction, and I had listened to the soundtrack a few times, and I really enjoyed it, but I didn't take the time to watch the show. Even still, I haven't. But it looks good, legitimately. And I think the cover is just, again, it suits the mood of the story. And I can just really imagine Anya Taylor-Joy as Beth Harmon, and this cover just encapsulates the mood of the character, the intensity of the character, and her battle with substances intermingled with her skill and love for the game of chess. So, great cover, no complaints here. So it can work sometimes, and sometimes it really doesn't. It depends on how I feel about the show or the movie, and if the cover fits the vibe of the book that you're going to read. And going back to The Witcher, this is Ciri. Ciri doesn't even show up until the end of the second book, so it's not a good representation of what you're going to read, whereas this and The Martian are. So that's why I picked that. Same reason that Eye of the World has Moraine. She's not the main character of The Wheel of Time. Not in the books, so I have an honorable mention in this category. Recently, I read the short story Who Goes There? It's a novella, it's not a short story. It's not the entirety of this. This is a collection of stories by John W. Campbell. But this story Who Goes There was the inspiration for John Carpenter's now famous science fiction classic, The Thing. And this cover, it's not exactly a movie tie-in cover, this is why it's an honorable mention, but it's a very cool and spooky cover, and it evokes the aesthetic of the film titles with the backlit letters and the color scheme and whatnot. So it's kind of a semi-movie tie-in cover, and it's just awesome in and of itself. But I wonder why I don't see this more often, like a semi-tie-in cover. Not exactly the movie cover, but if you see it, it might kind of trigger something. Kind of like how Aragon is this dragon with the D replaced with an E. It kind of makes you think of dragons, but it's not exactly. Anyway. The next one is Nicest Spine. And my offering in this category, I would again say War and Peace. I already showed you guys that one. But I would also put it on this list because it's got the painting on the side. It's beautiful. But I would also put the Necronomicon, my collection of H.P. Lovecraft stories. Just the spine, it's so intimidating. It's so... Look how thick it is. And it's so dark and spooky. It's got the statue of Cthulhu there. And it just looks awesome sitting on my shelf. And it's so simple. It's just black and gold. And it's got wonderful texture. It's just one of my favorite spines. And for pretty much opposite reasons, I haven't read this one yet, but I've got a hardcover of Les Miserables. This was a gift from my family, actually. And I love this spine as well, but like for opposite reasons of the Lovecraft one. It's colorful, it's got this very nice, pleasing aesthetic to it. And once I read it and I find a place for it on my shelf, it's just going to look so cool with the rest, because books I don't read, I have them like stacked in a separate place, and so the read go on the shelf and the unread are elsewhere. Definitely these. Very cool spine. And this spine as well. I mean, I recently repurchased this after giving up my copy when I moved because it was very heavy, and so I had to replace it with an equally heavy one. And I like this whole cover. It's very simple with just the white whales, and the spine is very elegant with 2 white whales and some spears, lances, I should say. Harpoons, that's the word. I can words. And just the name, publisher, it's blue. I don't know, it just evokes the white, the blue. Makes me think about the sea and how much I enjoy this story and that I really need to reread it at some point, but my book stack is big. So prompt number 4 is nicest or favorite nonfiction covers. I don't read a lot of nonfiction, but I do read some. And I recently read this, Man-Eaters of Kumaon by Jim Corbett. Corbett was a man, I believe he was a colonel or something like this in the British Army, and he lived in India in the Kumaon region, which I believe no longer exists. It was one of the subdivisions. I haven't read exactly the history about this, but this book is written by him, and it's his experience with hunting man-eating tigers. It's one of the simultaneously scariest and awesomest books I've read, because on one hand, you read about this quintessential British gentleman with a marvelous mustache and incredible, uncanny aiming skills, and, out there tracking, and it's so inspirational. And on the other hand, you get to read about these very terrifying tigers that turn to man-eating. But there's a little more to it, though, because Jim Corbett really stresses in his introduction that tigers don't normally hunt people. We're not normally on the menu, and he stresses heavily in the opening that tigers that become a threat to people, it's because they're old or they were injured by a hunter who maybe didn't finish up on the kill. And so they turn to man-eating because men are much easier to kill than pretty much anything else, and that could provide them with a meal. And it's not something that he's happy about, that he has to hunt these things down. And it was incredibly dangerous work, and he became an important conservationist. And I love this cover with the tiger. It is incredibly threatening and intimidating. And on the back, I know this is what covers, but just bear with me. The back, you can actually see him with a bird here. This is when he was old, when he was done, as far as I understand it, hunting tigers. And I have 2 other books by him. This one is another collection of tigers, and I believe a few leopards that turned man-eater as well. And again, very nice cover. This one, I ordered it and it came wrapped in plastic, so I haven't even unwrapped that. This one I'm going to read last from him. It's got a nice picture of a leopard on the cover, and this is about the same size as the other 2. They're all relatively fast and easy to read. This is just one animal that he hunted, one man-eating leopard. So I'm saving this for the end because this is probably the equivalent of his arch nemesis. But yeah, very thought-provoking books, and even, like, I'm not into hunting. I think it's hunting for fun. I can't put my mind around it. But this was a guy that hunted dangerous animals. He did hunt for sport on occasion, but he also turned conservationist. So he shares not only the adventures of, at least in this first one, he shares not only his adventures of hunting down these dangerous man-eaters, he also shares various anecdotal or poignant or even sad stories of encounters with other tigers. He shares a story about his dog. Anyway, I could talk about these for a long time. I'll get on to the next category. Category number 5. I'm going to be quick with this one. Least favorite covers of any kind. I've got 2 that I don't care for. And the horrible thing is these are both some of the best books that I own don't have great covers. At least I don't like them. One is The Secret Agent by Joseph Conrad. I can't say anything that would overstate how much I enjoyed reading this book. It had such great twists, and it's Joseph Conrad. I mean, the guy was a master. But it's a boring orange and white cover with a frickin' penguin. I just don't... I literally bought it for Joseph Conrad's name. I had very little idea about the story, except that it was going to feature spies or something. And I did not buy it for this boring cover. The other one, again, one of my favorite books. This one's a bit beat up because it was a gift, and the guy had worn it very well while reading it. The Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay. Again, just an amazing historical fiction story about guys that invented comic book character. It's got incredible insight. It's an amazing book. But this cover is boring for me. It's got a little tiny guy here who's been chained up, and while that's an interesting idea, this is the cover that I think most people got. At least it was the first edition cover, I believe. It's just better. What even is this? Like, okay, escape is a big part of the story, but I think that this is... the next one I wasn't really sure what to do with. It's number 6, covers that I like in a weird way. I don't really have a lot of weird covers. At least not ones that are going to fit just in the weird thing, as opposed to some of the covers I've seen people put out there. I didn't even know that there were such weird covers. So I'm just going to go with this. This is a book called Roadside Picnic. It's science fiction. It had a lot of influence on like the Wasteland thing. I'm pretty sure it also was a major influence for District 9. And I'm really looking forward to reading it. I haven't read it yet. And I love this cover, like the colors and all of that, but what even is this? I mean, the fence and the factory and all of that I get. I think these are like 2 planes of existence or a wormhole or I don't even know. I just know that I like it, but I don't know what it is. So the next one was also hard for me to pin down. Number 7 is modern style, or abstract covers, and it means whatever you want it to mean. So, the closest I could think of for this was this cover for Elmer Gantry by Sinclair Lewis. Again, incredible literary fiction. This was expressing, Sinclair Lewis expressed his concerns for the power that religious leaders can have, especially if they themselves are less than perfect, shall we say. And I expect very few people out there will have read this, but I just really like this cover, like the face, the ill-defined buildings. I don't know. You can see a Bible here. It somehow has personality without creating anything definite. It doesn't tell you how to imagine Elmer. You know, it lets the book speak for itself, but it has a stark, sharp, jagged feel to it, and a cross, which is thematically perfect. So I like that. And also, these covers for The Witcher, apart from the annoying Netflix sticker, I like these a lot more. They don't tell you what to think. They don't feel sort of awkward. They just have this wolfish, because the main character, Geralt, has like a wolf medallion. And you can see a little tiny boat, so there's something distinct in there as well, and the color is just nice. I really prefer these new covers for The Witcher. And also, speaking of fantasy, the Wheel of Time covers that I have. Like, they have distinct objects. Like, this has a tree and like a dry, arid landscape. I think this is probably Shale Ghoul or something like that. If you haven't read it, it's fine. It's like the Robert Jordan's Mordor, basically. But it's indistinct at the same time. So a lot of the covers are like this. They have a landscape or a castle, but it doesn't seem to relate to anything that I actually read in the book. Not directly enough to say that this is this scene or that scene or whatever. Like I said before, the original paintings for these were amazing, but I like these. They feel academic somehow. They're not very hard sell. They're just kind of generally pretty. I also really like my cover for Dune. Just the outline of the sandworm and the two moons and the arid landscape. And I'm not going to talk much about this because the movie just came out. I made a video discussing my thoughts on why it's really concise and hard to adapt. If you've read it, you know what's in here. If you haven't read it and you like science fiction, you should. And even if you don't like science fiction, I myself wasn't that into science fiction. I was kind of reading mostly literary fiction when I read this, but it's very literary. I think it's about as literary as you can get and still refer to something as science fiction. And it's a really nice cover. Again, I like the academic thing. You get an outline of a sandworm, but you're able to imagine what you like based on Frank Herbert's original and moving words. So this is on the list as well. And number 8, I'm gonna reach a little into outside the box with this, maybe even a little into left field, but it applies in my opinion, and it gives me an excuse to talk about one of my favorite stories. It wasn't always one of my favorite stories, but it became that with time. Category number 8 is covers that you don't understand until you've read the story. Well, read the book, but this is a stretch. I'm gonna talk about Watchmen, because Watchmen is it's the only comic I can think of that I've read, and yeah, we call it graphic novel. It was a 12-issue limited series comic. But to me, it's the only graphic novel comic that I've read that actually feels like a book. It has developed characters, it has complicated subplots, and most importantly, it has an ending. It doesn't just go on and on the way that basically comics do. And that's the power of a limited series. It's the difference between a mini-series and a weekly series that'll just go until they run out of ideas. And Watchmen is a rare example of a comic that was done this way. And best of all, too, it is a superhero story, which again, when you do see limited series, they're kind of more bizarre, or they're westerns or something. They're not going to be superheroes, because you want that. The companies want those cash cows, and Watchmen sadly kind of got turned into one, but actually a lot of the tie-ins to this were pretty good as well. I also read Doomsday Clock. Anyway, this is about covers. The reason I wanted to mention this with covers is because when the chapters were first published, the 12 chapters were first published in comic book format, the covers are all very strange. They kind of have vaguely faces in them, or eyes at the very least, but you don't understand what you're really looking at until you read the comic, and then you'll have a zooming out kind of effect. Or in this case, you know, this turns out to be a puddle with reflecting a neon light, and Rorschach steps into it, and then we have progression from there. And it's just such a cool effect that adds this extra layer within within an already layered story, that it's literally in the visual presentation that you don't understand what you're looking at until you explore further. And again, this is something I would recommend if you like hard-hitting stories. If maybe you saw the movie and you think it was not so good, or even if you loved the movie or hated it, I would still recommend this. There's enough differences that if you didn't like the movie, this might be the fleshed out version that you needed for context, or you might just love this on its own. And even if you've got a little superhero fatigue, I think that this would be refreshing. And even if you don't normally like superheroes, I would still recommend this, because it's just fascinating. And if you have a sense, if you're into period pieces, there's a lot of stuff in here about Cold War paranoia, which is probably going to be relevant for a long time. So get Watchmen and read it, and you don't even have to like read the sequels, just pretend they don't exist and just be happy with this, because it's an amazing book. The only comic I would call a book. Category number 9 is also hard for me because I haven't bought a book for its cover in a very long time. I don't do it. Like, I've wound up with covers I don't like because I just really want to read the book. I sometimes get covers that I do like, but I have never prioritized it. And I definitely don't buy books for covers. It's just not something that I do anymore. I actually, when I was a child, I bought a book for a cover, mostly, because I wanted a book about tanks, and I couldn't even read yet, so I wanted something with pictures inside of it. And I don't have that book anymore, or maybe it's tucked away somewhere, but I'm pretty sure I haven't got it. But here's a picture of the cover. It was called Pacific Victory, and it turned out later, when I was older, I read parts of it. I kind of flipped around. Believe it or not, I wasn't really much of a reader when I was a child. I read now and then, and a book like this would have been over my head as a kid, but there it is, probably my only cover buy, and it was a long time ago. It was really good, very concisely written, and a good source if you're going to write a project or something. Plus, it'll be kind of collectible now. Probably. And lastly, I'm supposed to tag other people because this is a tag video, but I've really been a little lazy with YouTube, but I've been busy, so I don't know a lot of people or channels in the BookTube community. I myself was not even tagged to do this. I got inspired to do it because I saw Books I'm Not Reading's video, Kelly's video on covering the tag, and then I watched Lisa's original video covering it, and I thought it looked fun. And the only person I would tag is Brandon's Bookshelf, but Kelly already tagged him, so he already knows. So just if you see it, maybe take some inspiration and talk about some covers. And if you do decide to cover it, just write me a comment or something. I'd love to see it, because covers are actually really fun. You know, they're the first thing that we see. And even though I never bought a book for a cover, except maybe kind of that one when I was a kid, it is the first thing that catches your eye when you're in the store. If you don't know, if you know the title, if you know the name of the author, that probably catches your attention. It catches my attention more than a cover. But a good cover might get you to look at something that you haven't seen. And I myself, typically when I buy books, I see the name of the book, or I see the name of the author, or I see this cover, and then it kind of all happens at once, you know, some order of that. And then typically I look at the first paragraph, maybe look at the notes on the back, and if it looks well written, I might just buy it. So even though I don't buy books for covers, the cover is an important part of the buying process. So it's fun to talk about them. Thank you, Lisa, for inventing this tag and giving us all an opportunity to talk about our favorite covers. Let me know some of yours down in the comments, or tell me that my choices are terrible or great. But thanks for watching, listening to me talk about these very cool covers on some very cool books. Anyway, do all the YouTube things and press the buttons and interact and all that stuff, and I'll see you next time.